I'll start this video by saying this. Dark Souls 1 is my go-to answer for best game of all time. Now of course the game has issues, and it throws a lot of the goodwill out of the window in some later areas. So today, to show you why this game is so beloved, we're going to take a deeper look at the area that made people fall in love with the game in the first place. Undead Burg. So to keep this reasonably concise, we'll be talking about the area leading up to Taurus Demon. To finalize the level, we will make it over the bridge to the shortcut, but not deal with Hellkite Drake any further. Got it? Great. Now while the Asylum acts as a mechanical tutorial, Undead Burg tries to imprint you with good ways to approach the game as a whole. This starts with the enemies in this area. The main two types in this level are the Armored Hollows and the Undead Soldiers. The Armored Hollows, with their heavily telegraphed attacks locking them into long recovery periods, are not much of a threat individually. However, they still punish you for rushing headlong into the battle. The game gives you a single hollow to examine when leaving Firelink Shrine. With proper spacing, they pose no real challenge. Where they become more dangerous, however, is when you encounter them in multiples. There, they can cover each other's recovery times, and you have to be patient taking them out one after another, or position well enough that you can either crowd control with AoE damage or juggle them. Where things start getting really spicy is when hollows throwing firebombs are thrown into the mix. While most problems could be solved by holding your shield or walking backwards, the third of the bombs forces you to take more chances. The Undead Soldiers, on the other hand, are more sophisticated foes, requiring a plan of action before fighting them. They still have mostly telegraphed attacks, but they all have their quirks that make them less approachable. The sword-wielding soldiers have excellent range and tracking, as well as much less recovery time. They require good spacing or use of the shield. The spear-wielding soldiers are turtling behind their shield, which makes it hard to hit them. Baiting them from behind their shield, or even learning how to break their guard, is necessary to beat them. While the soldiers need more strategy, they are also much more predictable and more easy to fight in groups. Lastly, there are also basic hollows, the like of the ones in the Asylum. Despite dealing a bit more damage, they're still just as slow as they were before. In the two scenarios they appear, they are set up so they are easily taken out by players who respect them, but quickly overwhelm a player who doesn't see them as a threat. They remind you to not underestimate enemies in this game. Now talking about them, neatly brings us to the topic of ambushes. Some might mistake ambushes as a cheap shot by the developers, but avoiding ambushes is only a question of being careful and observing of your surroundings. Here, for example, you can see the hands hanging from the cliff, and here, if I didn't already know there was a guy there, you can hear him breathing, or even use the third-person camera to catch a glimpse of him. Undead Burg houses multiple great encounters that teach spacing, awareness, and planning, skills needed for the rest of the game, making it the perfect bootcamp for the aspiring chosen undead. To spice up the mostly linear path to Taurus Demon, there are secret and not so secret side areas. The first is this jump to get a Ring of Sacrifice. Jumping is not the easiest thing in the game, so for new players, only the daredevils will go for it. So the reward being an item that gives you safety to go for more risks is fitting, and validates that playstyle. The next secret is one for the explorers. From on high you can see an item hanging out of this window, as well as this humanity. This makes you aware there is a secret without telling you how to get there, which immediately makes the explorer's head peek up. The roars are a bit lacking though, which makes me wonder why they couldn't have switched the location of the wooden shield with this soul. The other secret area is much more satisfying in that regard, and easier to find as well. It houses some throwing knives and a crossbow, as well as the first merchant of the game. He gives you the option to try different weapons if you regret your starting choices, as well as some decent armor with a good amount of poise. He also gives you access to leave messages and become an active part of the community, and the residence key, which just makes you pay more attention while looking for a door to slam it into. Both secret areas loop back into the level naturally, which makes you understand the area more. This makes the world feel more consistent and furthers your immersion into it. The bonfire at about the middle point of the level acts as the first major release of pressure, but is also where the difficulty starts ramping up considerably in preparation for Taurus Demon. The next side area gives you access to black fire bombs, and just a bit later the residence key has its payoff to hand you some gold pine resin. Close to the pine resin you spot this Black Knight. Its design is meant to look like a much more serious threat than the rest of the enemies in the level. He has his back turned to you, giving different players different impressions. The frightened newbie will see it as a sign that he has not aggroed onto you and can be ignored. The more daredevilish player will deduce, though, that he has not spotted you yet, and so you could score a cheap hit on him. So far in this game, every enemy that has been backstabbable died in a single hit. When inevitably a backstab makes him barely flinch, he acts as a warning that you're not always as smart as you think you are. With the mechanics the game has emphasized so far, a Black Knight is an absolute crusher. He takes little damage from anything but critical attacks, has few openings, and does not let up. Defeating him, however, earns you his weapon, which is really powerful, especially for the early game. At least, that's what I wish happened. In reality, he drops his weapon only about 20% of the time. Otherwise, he leaves you with a single Titanite chunk, which is irrelevant for ages, and the blue tier stone ring, which may look shiny, but due to its design flaws is useless in about 99% of situations. This crushes people, especially when they notice he does not respawn. The only argument I could think of for why it's not a guaranteed drop is for replay value, making it necessary for players to choose a different weapon, which does not really justify alienating new players in my opinion. This is also where I'll start talking about returning players. Undead Burg, being essentially a long-form second tutorial, might make it sound boring for people who've already experienced the whole shebang, but Undead Burg houses many ways to spice up even their new journey. Let's start with this Black Knight. While he's quite the menace on the first time through, on the second go, potentially even after parrying Gwyn to death, his weaknesses become apparent. His long and heavy swings make parrying him quite easy. This way you can take him out in just a few hits. Also, for players in the know, the merchant drops the Uchi Katana, which while not much more powerful than the weapons he sells, gives another option for returning players. Lastly, and probably most obviously, we have to talk about Havel the Rock. Only accessible this early by choosing the Master Key as your starting gift, he can be encountered at the basement of the tower, which also houses Taurus Demon. Acting as the most effective newbie repellent, his design with his giant club, which turns out to be the tooth of a dragon, and his palm-thick metal armor makes it clear he's not messing around. He immediately charges at you, giving you only the option to face him head-on the narrow staircase, jump into the basement, or retreat. He takes almost no damage even from backstabs and riposts, and one-shots you with some attacks even through your shield. Furthermore, the reward for killing him, Havel's ring, while probably the most powerful ring in the game, only really becomes that powerful when trying to wear heavy armor or weapons in the late game. This is unless you're using one of the special weapons hidden in the early game, like the Black Knight weapons or the Zweihander, which brings us back to the returning player. While still tedious, Havel is manageable to beat, and on top of his ring, opens up the path to the Darkroot Basin, housing another Black Knight with the halberd, perhaps the best weapon in the game, the Dragon Crest shield, the Hunter's set, and even a path to Andre, which lets you skip Taurus Demon entirely. He opens up so much that defeating him is worth it to the player who knows what they're doing, so I'm glad From gave us the option to do this, while keeping new players on a path that gives them good learning experiences. One more secret before the boss is the little crystal lizard in this barrel, which again is really only there for the player who uses the more special weapons. Taurus Demon, while fairly simplistic, is the perfect capstone to everything that is built up in Undead Burg and acts as a rite of passage. Before the fight properly starts, you're shot at from behind by two undead soldiers. If you don't just rush down the bridge, you will notice this before you hit the point where Taurus Demon jumps off his tower. They also make you notice the elevated platform, which you can do a plunging attack from. This is a trust fall onto the developers, and the rules laid out by them in the Asylum. You can cheese this fight by doing the plunging attack over and over again, but this is tedious, and having to get past Taurus Demon multiple times makes it not much safer than fighting him normally. When doing so, he is a test of your spacing, as his attacks have long startup and recovery, giving you clear windows to strike and back off. Blocking can be used to avoid damage, but knocks you back far enough that punishing off of it is not possible. Lastly, even the explorers get their satisfying end to this episode, as Taurus Demon is weak to both fire damage from the black firebombs, as well as lightning damage from the gold pine resin. After his defeat, he showers you with explicit and implicit rewards. You find Solaire, who opens up the ability for co-op, and you get a shortcut to the bonfire, making the world click even more into place. But let's not forget about this guy. Hellkite Drake acts as a last piece of tension. When you first encounter him, ironically enough, also just before reaching this bonfire, you probably already felt like you escaped something far beyond your capabilities. While not directly tasked with killing him here, you still have to actively engage him and escape. If the charred bridge doesn't set off your alarm bells, his first sweep down definitely does. The tension released when making it across the bridge and to the bonfire is immense, and leaves you with a feeling of true accomplishment. That is the core appeal of Dark Souls, and why people love it so much. Anyway, if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. I will do level reviews for other games as well. I've got some on my list already. So until then, see ya!